He grew up carrying a face the whole world already knew before he ever set foot on a film set. That is the strange inheritance of being born a Jackson. Most families hand down old photographs and half-remembered stories. This one handed down a legacy so massive that ordinary childhood moments got swallowed by it. As the son of Jermaine Jackson, he spent his early years surrounded by a name that meant something to millions of strangers before it meant anything to him personally. His father tried to keep the noise at a distance, tried to let him just be a kid at family gatherings, but some things cannot be shielded forever. Michael's music played in the house. Michael's stories came up at dinner. Michael's shadow stretched over almost everything. Then, as the boy grew into a teenager and then a young man, people started noticing something. The smile. The eyes. Small gestures that seemed to echo his uncle without anyone teaching him to make them. What began as a few offhand comments from relatives spread further, until strangers online were making the comparison too. Here is a question worth sitting with before we go further. If you looked in the mirror every day and saw pieces of one of the most famous faces in history staring back, would you run from that, or lean into it? Jaafar Jackson leaned in, but not in the way you might expect. Building something of his own first. Instead of chasing the family name into the spotlight, Jaafar spent years doing the opposite. He built a music career quietly, on his own terms, long before anyone imagined him standing in for Michael on a movie screen. In 2019, he released his debut single, Got Me Singing, a smooth R&B track that hinted at his family's musical roots without ever trying to imitate them. It was not a viral moment. It did not dominate headlines. And by most accounts, that suited him fine. He kept releasing music rooted in classic soul rather than whatever trend happened to be dominating the charts that month. While plenty of young artists with famous surnames might have leaned hard into the association, Jaafar seemed more interested in being heard as himself. In an early interview with a German outlet promoting that debut single, he came across as unusually relaxed for someone in his position, talking about his favorite songs, laughing that he could not remember all the lyrics to one of them, mentioning that he was in a long-term relationship, and describing his fondness for animals, including 2 dogs and, at one point, a pet snake. What stood out most from that conversation was how he described his own childhood. He did not talk about growing up inside a media storm. He described something closer to an ordinary kid hanging around a large extended family, an uncle who happened to be famous, holidays and game nights that felt to him unremarkable. Before music took over his focus, he had actually pictured a completely different future for himself. Professional golf. Life had other plans. So here is the picture before the biopic ever entered his life. A musician building a modest, soul-driven catalog, publicly declining to trade on his last name, seemingly uninterested in becoming anyone's stand-in for a legend. Which makes what happened next even more surprising. Turning down the safe road. At some point, that quiet path stopped being enough of a challenge, or maybe an opportunity arrived that was too significant to turn down. Jaafar was offered the role of Michael Jackson in a major biopic. Not a supporting reference, not a cameo. The lead. Acting had never been part of his plan. Music was. And yet he said yes to something that would demand he step away from the studio and into a world of grueling rehearsal schedules, physical transformation, and a level of public scrutiny that dwarfed anything a debut single could bring. Why would someone who had spent years deliberately avoiding comparisons to his uncle suddenly choose to become him on camera, in front of the entire world? That is one of the more interesting tensions in this whole story, and it is worth keeping in the back of your mind as we go. Here's the part that might surprise you. The family name did not open the door for him the way you would assume. Reports from the production describe an open casting process with roughly 2,000 hopefuls competing for the role. Actors studied old footage for months. Dancers rehearsed the choreography obsessively. Nobody handed Jaafar a shortcut. He auditioned like every other contender, and by most accounts he had to prove, repeatedly, that he deserved the part on merit rather than bloodline. 2 years of becoming someone else. Once he had the role, the real work started, and it did not let up for 2 years. Jaafar committed to what amounts to a full physical and vocal reconstruction. He trained to master Michael's voice, his posture, the particular way he moved through a room, the subtle emotional cues in his face during interviews. None of it came easily. Some of the physical work reportedly felt uncomfortable at first, and progress in certain areas was slow going. But according to people close to the production, he kept returning to anything that did not feel exactly right until it did. His stated goal throughout was not imitation. He wanted the performance to feel lived in rather than performed, so that audiences would forget they were watching someone playing a part. That is a much harder bar to clear than simply nailing a few recognizable dance moves, and it meant treating the role less like a costume and more like a second skin he had to grow into. To get there, he reportedly went further than most actors preparing for a biographical role typically go. He spent time actually living inside Michael's former childhood bedroom on the Jackson family estate in Encino, immersing himself in a space filled with personal history rather than studying his uncle from a comfortable distance. Ask yourself this: how many actors would be willing to sleep inside the actual bedroom of the person they are about to portray, just to understand them a little better? Finding the walk, the voice, the moonwalk. Certain elements of Michael Jackson's public persona are so recognizable that even a small mistake would be obvious to millions of viewers. The moonwalk is probably the clearest example. It is one of the most famous dance movements in entertainment history, and Jaafar reportedly treated it with the seriousness of a technical exam rather than a fun bit of choreography. He broke the movement down into its component parts, focusing on weight shifts and pauses most casual viewers would never consciously notice, working the sequence over and over until it stopped looking rehearsed and started looking effortless. The voice presented an even tougher challenge. Michael Jackson's speaking voice, not just his singing voice, is instantly identifiable to fans worldwide, and getting it wrong in even small ways would have been glaring. Jaafar reportedly spent long stretches studying archival interviews and performances, paying close attention to breathing patterns, rhythm, and the soft, particular way Michael delivered even simple sentences. Whenever a line came out sounding forced or artificial, he would go back and work it again. Somewhere along the way, according to those close to the project, something shifted. The voice stopped sounding like an impression and started carrying real warmth. That distinction between mimicry and genuine embodiment is really the through line of this entire preparation process. He reportedly went beyond public performance footage too, studying Michael's personal journals, handwritten notes, and daily affirmations to understand the mindset behind the public figure rather than just the choreography. Speaking about that process during a joint television appearance with castmates in early 2026, Jaafar described wanting to make both his family and his late uncle proud, framing the role as something deeply personal rather than simply a professional assignment. The mirror moment. There is a particular scene almost every actor who undergoes a major physical transformation describes at some point, and Jaafar experienced his own version of it. After extended sessions with award-winning makeup designer Bill Corso applying prosthetics and styling, he reportedly looked into a mirror one day and did not immediately recognize the person looking back. For a moment, by his own account, it did not feel like his own face. Felt like Michael's, rather than reshaping his features into a completely different mask. The makeup team reportedly worked with the physical similarities Jaafar already carried, subtly enhancing rather than covering. That choice mattered. It meant that as filming continued, the transformation felt less like putting on a disguise each morning and more like slowly stepping closer to someone he had grown up watching from a distance. What do you think that does to a person psychologically? Spending 2 years slowly becoming someone else's public image while trying not to lose your own sense of self in the process. It is worth pausing on before scrolling past. Recreating a night the world already knows by heart, perhaps no single sequence in the film carried more pressure than recreating Michael Jackson's celebrated 1988 performance of Human Nature at Wembley Stadium. That is not an obscure moment buried in archival footage. It is a performance fans have watched and rewatched for decades. One where every pause and gesture is practically memorized by die-hard audiences. Recreating something that well-documented leaves almost no room for interpretation or error. Jaafar reportedly could not lean on his surname to earn goodwill here. Every movement had to hold up against the real footage that millions of people already carry in their memory. According to those on set, he approached the sequence not as an attempt to replace the original performance but as an effort to honor it faithfully for audiences who might be encountering it for the first time through the film. What the director saw. Directing a biographical film about a figure this scrutinized comes with its own kind of pressure, and director Antoine Fuqua reportedly went into the project aware that a single misstep could undermine the entire film's credibility. But according to people involved in production, Fuqua noticed something in Jaafar early on that gave him confidence. A level of preparation and discipline that could not be faked or coached into existence overnight. As filming progressed, the perception on set reportedly shifted. Jaafar stopped looking like someone doing an impression and started, in the words of people close to the production, feeling like someone who had genuinely stepped into the role. That shift in perception apparently changed the entire atmosphere around the shoot, and it gave the director room to push Jaafar further rather than settle for something merely convincing. Family memories on morning television. When the film's promotional cycle began, Jaafar's public appearances offered a different angle on the story, less about technical preparation and more about the emotional weight of representing a relative who happened to be one of the most famous entertainers who ever lived. During an appearance on a major morning show, he described childhood memories rather than dwelling on the pressure of the role. Family game days at the Encino estate, playing hide-and-seek and enjoying treats at Neverland Ranch, riding attractions and watching movies together as a family. He noted that in the moment, as a kid, he was not thinking of the man beside him as Michael Jackson, global icon. He was thinking of him as an uncle. That distinction between the private family figure and the public legend runs through nearly everything Jaafar has said publicly about this project. There is also a widely shared photograph from years earlier showing a young Jaafar standing beside Michael in a sparkling jacket, holding a microphone, with Michael's hand resting on his shoulder. Fans have since pointed to that image as an almost eerie full-circle moment. The child in that photo grew up to carry his uncle's story onto movie screens worldwide. Does a coincidence like that feel like fate to you? Or is it simply what happens when a story eventually catches up with itself? Feel free to share your take in the comments. On a separate late-night appearance, Jaafar offered a lighter, more self-deprecating story about the process. He admitted that during his early audition preparation, he had only about 20 days to learn the Billie Jean choreography from scratch, and that at the time he genuinely doubted he could pull it off. He joked about looking back at his rough early rehearsal footage compared to the finished film sequence and being embarrassed by the difference. The host needled him, suggesting he would not have even qualified as one of Michael's backup dancers at that stage, and the exchange landed as one of the more human, unguarded moments of the entire press tour. Beyond imitation, throughout the preparation process, Jaafar reportedly kept returning to one guiding idea, that copying movements was never going to be enough. A performance, in his view, needed to be understood before it could be convincingly recreated. So rather than memorizing choreography in isolation, he studied the emotional intent behind each performance, the rhythm and feeling that shaped why Michael moved the way he did in the first place. Balancing the acting side of the role with the pure performance side reportedly became one of his biggest ongoing challenges. Lean too far into technical replication and the character risks feeling hollow. Lean too far into personal interpretation and the physical authenticity suffers. Getting both to work together, consistently across dozens of scenes, was apparently a constant balancing act throughout filming. Premiere night. By the time the film's Los Angeles premiere arrived, the finished product was finally on display, and attention understandably centered on how convincing Jaafar's transformation had turned out to be. He reportedly told press at the event that his preparation had gone well beyond dance training into a deep study of Michael's everyday habits and behaviors, watching old performances and interviews repeatedly to absorb small, easily overlooked mannerisms. The evening carried emotional moments beyond Jaafar's transformation as well. Co-star Nia Long, who portrays Jaafar Jackson in the film, spoke about the strength and resilience of the woman she was portraying, adding a quieter, more reflective note to what was otherwise a celebratory night. Why the story keeps drawing people in. When the first teaser trailer dropped, it turned into an immediate worldwide conversation rather than a routine promotional beat. Viewers slowed down individual frames, studied expressions, and debated whether the resemblance held up under close inspection. That level of scrutiny is unusual for a trailer, but it reflects just how personally invested global audiences remain in Michael Jackson's legacy, decades after his death. For Jaafar, all of that attention effectively meant an ongoing referendum on every choice he made, from the smallest gesture to the biggest performance sequence. And that raises one final question worth thinking about. Is it possible to ever fully separate a legacy from the person carrying it forward? Or does every new chapter inevitably become part of the same, continuing story? If this deep dive into Jaafar Jackson's transformation gave you a new perspective on what it takes to portray a legend, let us know which part of his journey stood out to you most in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this one, breaking down the real preparation and pressure behind the biggest biopics and performances in music history, stick around, because there is plenty more to uncover.